Some people enter your life like they will stay forever. They speak softly, they understand you, they make you feel seen, and slowly, without noticing, you begin to invest your emotions in them. You start giving your time, your attention, your care, your loyalty. You begin to believe this connection is permanent. But one day, something changes. The energy changes, the effort changes, the closeness changes, and suddenly, you feel the pain of losing something you thought would always remain. Buddhism teaches a quiet but powerful truth. Not everyone who comes into your life is meant to stay in your life. Some people are only a chapter, not the whole story. When we give permanent emotions to temporary people, we create suffering that could have been avoided. True peace begins when we learn where to invest our emotions and where to gently let go. In this video, you will discover 5 powerful Buddhist lessons that will help you protect your peace, strengthen your mind, and stop giving your emotional energy to what was never meant to last. 1. Impermanence is the nature of life. Buddhism teaches that one of the deepest truths of life is impermanence. Everything that exists is constantly changing, whether we notice it or not. Nothing in this world remains fixed forever. People change, situations change, feelings change, and even our own thoughts change from moment to moment. Life is not static, it is always moving, always flowing, always transforming. Yet the human mind often resists this truth. It wants stability, certainty, and emotional security. It wants to believe that the things and people that make us feel comfortable will remain exactly as they are. We often meet someone and feel a strong connection. We believe they will always understand us in the same way. We assume that the bond we feel today will remain equally strong tomorrow. We trust someone and imagine they will always remain close to us. We begin to build emotional dependence on something that is naturally unstable. But the truth is, life does not promise permanence. Every person is on their own journey of growth and change. People learn new things, experience different challenges, develop new priorities, and slowly evolve into different versions of themselves. Sometimes the change is small and gradual. Sometimes the change is sudden and unexpected. But change is always happening. When we expect something to last forever, we create a silent expectation in the mind. We start believing that what we feel today should remain the same indefinitely. We want relationships to stay exactly as they were when they first began. We want people to always behave in ways that make us feel secure. But when reality does not match these expectations, disappointment begins. We feel confused, hurt, or even betrayed, not because change happened, but because we believed change should not happen. Impermanence does not mean that everything loses value. Instead, it teaches us to see life more clearly. Temporary people are part of life's natural movement. They come into our lives for different reasons. Some come to teach us lessons. Some come to help us grow. Some come to show us parts of ourselves that we did not understand before. And some simply come and go without leaving a deep mark. Not every connection is meant to become permanent, and that does not mean the connection was meaningless. Even temporary experiences can carry deep value when understood with awareness. Just like seasons change, human connections also change. Spring does not stay forever, yet it brings beauty. Autumn does not stay forever, yet it brings transformation. In the same way, some people bring happiness for a certain time, while others bring important lessons that shape our understanding of life. When we understand impermanence deeply, we stop forcing things to remain the same. We stop trying to control what cannot be controlled. Instead, we begin to appreciate moments as they are, without demanding that they last forever. Understanding impermanence does not make the heart cold or distant. It makes the mind mature and balanced. It helps us care for people without clinging to them. It allows us to experience connection without losing our emotional stability. We begin to appreciate the present moment instead of constantly worrying about the future. We learn to accept that change is not always a loss. Sometimes it is simply life moving forward. When we accept that everything changes, we stop expecting permanent emotional security from temporary people. We stop placing our entire happiness in something that may naturally transform. Instead, we develop a stable foundation within ourselves. We begin to understand that peace cannot come from trying to make temporary things permanent. Peace comes from accepting the temporary nature of life and learning to remain balanced even as things change. The more deeply we understand impermanence, the lighter our emotional burdens become. We no longer feel shocked when circumstances change. We no longer feel broken when people move in different directions. We recognize that change is part of the natural order of existence. With this awareness, we become more patient, more understanding, and more emotionally free. When we stop demanding permanence from a temporary world, we stop creating unnecessary suffering for ourselves. We begin to experience relationships with more clarity and less fear. We learn to care with wisdom instead of attachment. And slowly, the mind becomes calmer because it is no longer fighting against the natural flow of life. Impermanence is not something to fear, it is something to understand. When understood deeply, it protects us from investing all our emotions in things that are constantly changing. It reminds us to appreciate without clinging, to care without losing balance, and to remain peaceful even when life moves in unexpected directions. Peace begins when we accept that change is not the enemy, but a fundamental part of existence. 2. Attachment creates unnecessary suffering. Buddhism teaches that much of the suffering we experience in life does not come from the outside world itself, but from the way we mentally and emotionally attach ourselves to it. Attachment is the strong desire to hold on to something and the fear of losing it. It is the belief that our happiness depends on a particular person, situation, or outcome remaining exactly the way we want it to be. When the mind becomes attached, it begins to seek emotional security in things that are naturally uncertain. This creates inner tension because life does not always move according to our expectations. Attachment often disguises itself as love, care, or loyalty, but in reality, attachment is rooted in fear. It is the fear that if a person changes, leaves, or behaves differently, our emotional stability will collapse. When we become deeply attached to someone, our thoughts begin to revolve around them. We start depending on their presence for comfort. We start depending on their words for reassurance. We start depending on their attention for emotional balance. Without realizing it, we slowly give control of our inner peace to someone else. When that person behaves kindly, we feel calm. When that person becomes distant, we feel anxious. When that person becomes busy, we feel neglected. Our emotional state begins to fluctuate based on factors that are outside our control. This creates instability within the mind. Temporary people, who are themselves going through their own life changes, cannot provide permanent emotional certainty. Their feelings, priorities, and circumstances may shift with time. When we expect consistency from something that is naturally inconsistent, disappointment becomes unavoidable. Attachment creates pressure not only for us, but also for the other person. When we depend too much on someone emotionally, we unknowingly expect them to behave in ways that continuously support our emotional needs. But every person has their own struggles, responsibilities, and inner world. They cannot always meet our emotional expectations, and when they fail to do so, frustration and sadness begin to grow. This does not mean the person is always wrong. It simply means that emotional dependence creates unrealistic expectations. Buddhism encourages detachment, but detachment does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. Detachment means developing the ability to remain emotionally balanced even when situations change. It means caring about people without making them the center of your emotional stability. It means appreciating relationships without believing that your entire happiness depends on them. Detachment creates space for healthier connections because it removes the pressure of emotional control. When attachment is strong, small changes feel very painful. A delayed message can create worry. A difference in behavior can create insecurity. A small misunderstanding can feel like a major emotional disturbance. But when detachment is practiced, the mind remains steady. You still care, but you do not panic. You still value the connection, but you do not lose your inner stability when something shifts. Attachment also creates fear of loss. The more tightly we hold on to someone emotionally, the more afraid we become of losing them. This fear can quietly affect our thoughts and actions. We may start overthinking simple situations. We may start seeking constant reassurance. We may start compromising our inner peace just to maintain a connection. In trying to avoid emotional pain, we actually create more emotional tension within ourselves. Detachment frees the mind from this constant pressure. It reminds us that while relationships can be meaningful, our emotional foundation should not depend entirely on another person. A balanced mind understands that connections can enrich life, but they should not define our sense of stability. When we stop attaching our emotional security to temporary people, we reduce unnecessary suffering. This understanding creates emotional maturity. You begin to care with awareness rather than dependency. You begin to value people without expecting them to complete you. You begin to experience connection without fear, constantly disturbing your peace. When attachment decreases, emotional freedom increases. You no longer feel controlled by someone's presence or absence. True emotional strength comes from knowing that your peace is not fragile. It does not collapse when circumstances change. It does not disappear when people behave differently. Instead, your peace becomes something you carry within yourself. You still form relationships, but you do not lose yourself inside them. Attachment creates suffering because it tries to make temporary things permanent. Detachment creates peace because it accepts life as it is. When you learn to care without clinging, you protect your emotional balance. You stop investing all your inner stability in something that may naturally change. In this way, detachment is not loss of connection, but protection of inner peace. 3. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Your inner world is one of the most valuable things you possess. It contains your thoughts, your emotions, your fears, your dreams, your memories, and your deepest feelings. It is a delicate space where your peace either grows or slowly gets disturbed. Buddhism teaches that protecting your inner world is essential if you want to live a calm and balanced life. Yet many people unknowingly allow too many others to enter this sensitive space without awareness or careful understanding. Often, we give emotional access too quickly. We meet someone new, and because they show kindness or interest, we begin to trust them deeply. We start sharing personal thoughts, private struggles, and emotional experiences without taking time to truly understand who they are. Sometimes we assume that because we feel comfortable in the moment, the connection must be safe. But comfort in the beginning does not always mean emotional safety in the long term. When too many people gain access to your inner world, your peace can easily become unstable. Every opinion begins to affect you. Every reaction begins to influence your mood. Every misunderstanding begins to create emotional discomfort. The more people who have influence over your inner state, the more difficult it becomes to maintain emotional balance. This is why wisdom requires awareness of who you allow into your emotional space. Not everyone is capable of understanding your depth. Not everyone has the emotional maturity to handle your vulnerability with care. Some people are still learning about themselves and may not know how to respect the emotional sensitivity of others. Some people listen only to respond, not to understand. Some people may unintentionally dismiss your feelings because they do not see the world in the same way you do. When we share too much with the wrong people, we often feel unheard, misunderstood, or emotionally exposed. Buddhism encourages mindful awareness in all relationships. This means observing people patiently before trusting them with your deeper emotions. It means understanding that emotional closeness should grow gradually, not instantly. Just as a plant needs time to grow strong roots before it can support its branches, emotional trust also needs time to develop stability. When we rush emotional closeness, we risk creating connections that feel intense but are not truly secure. Some people are only meant to share simple conversations. Some people are only meant to be part of short interactions. Some people may come into your life during a particular phase and then naturally move on. This does not mean those interactions are meaningless. It simply means that not every connection is meant to become deeply personal. Wisdom lies in recognizing the difference between temporary presence and genuine emotional reliability. When you allow everyone to access your inner world, you may begin to feel emotionally scattered. Too many opinions can create confusion. Too many expectations can create pressure. Too many influences can slowly disconnect you from your own clarity. Over time, you may notice that your thoughts are no longer calm because they are shaped by external voices. You may feel uncertain because too many perspectives are affecting your decisions. Protecting your inner world helps you remain connected to your own understanding. Protecting your emotional space does not mean isolating yourself from others. It means choosing wisely who you allow to influence your mental and emotional state. It means developing the ability to be kind and respectful with everyone while being deeply open with only a few. This creates emotional stability because your inner peace is not constantly affected by changing external interactions. Buddhist wisdom teaches balance in all things. Being completely closed can create loneliness, while being completely open can create vulnerability to unnecessary emotional pain. The middle path is awareness. It is the ability to interact with the world without giving away your emotional center too easily. When you maintain this balance, you are able to form meaningful connections without losing your sense of inner stability. People who protect their inner world often appear calm and steady. They do not react strongly to every opinion because their sense of self is not easily shaken. They do not feel the need to explain themselves to everyone because they understand that not everyone needs to understand them. Their peace comes from knowing that their emotional foundation is not dependent on constant external validation. Over time, you begin to realize that emotional access is a responsibility. Those who are allowed into your inner world should be able to respect your boundaries, understand your sensitivity, and support your growth. When emotional access is given with awareness, relationships become healthier and more balanced. When emotional access is given without awareness, relationships can become a source of confusion and instability. Protecting your inner world also helps you develop self-trust. When fewer external voices influence your thinking, you begin to hear your own inner wisdom more clearly. Your decisions become calmer because they are not rushed by emotional pressure from others. Your mind becomes quieter because it is not overwhelmed by unnecessary opinions. This clarity strengthens your ability to understand what truly supports your peace and what disturbs it. Not everyone needs to understand every part of you. Not everyone needs to know every thought you have. Some parts of your inner world are meant to be protected so that they can grow in peace. Just as a seed grows best when protected from harsh conditions, your emotional well-being grows best when it is not constantly exposed to unstable influences. When you accept that not everyone deserves deep emotional access, You begin to feel lighter. You stop trying to make everyone understand you. You stop expecting emotional support from people who are not ready to provide it. You stop feeling disappointed when casual connections remain casual. This understanding creates emotional independence because your peace is no longer dependent on being understood by everyone. The purpose of protecting your inner world is not to create distance from people, but to create clarity within yourself. It allows you to maintain kindness without losing balance. It allows you to connect without becoming overwhelmed. It allows you to care without becoming emotionally exhausted. Your inner world is where your peace lives. It is where your understanding develops. It is where your emotional strength grows. When you choose carefully who you allow into this space, you protect the conditions that allow peace to remain stable. Wisdom is not only about understanding others, it is also about understanding yourself. When you value your emotional space, you naturally become more selective about where you invest your energy. This selectiveness is not rejection of others, but protection of your peace. Not everyone is meant to walk deeply into your inner world. Some people are simply passing by. Some are meant to stay at the surface. Only a few are meant to understand the deeper parts of who you are. When you recognize this, you stop feeling the need to open your heart to everyone equally. Protecting your inner world is an act of self-respect. It allows you to remain emotionally stable, even when the outside world is unpredictable. And when your inner world is stable, temporary people can no longer disturb your peace easily. 4. Expectations create invisible pain. One of the most subtle causes of emotional suffering is expectation. Expectations often remain hidden in the mind, quietly shaping how we interpret the behavior of others. We expect people to respond in certain ways, to understand us without explanation, to treat us with the same level of care that we offer them. When these expectations are not fulfilled, the pain that follows can feel confusing, because nothing visibly harmful has happened. Yet internally, the mind feels disappointed, restless, or even hurt. Buddhism teaches that expectations often create suffering because they attempt to control what is naturally uncertain. Human beings are constantly changing. Their thoughts, priorities, emotions, and circumstances evolve with time. Yet, when we build expectations, we create an imagined version of how someone should behave in the future. We mentally design a fixed outcome and hope reality will follow the same script. But life does not follow personal scripts. Life unfolds according to countless causes and conditions, many of which are beyond our control. Expectations often begin very quietly. At first, they may feel reasonable. We expect kindness from those who have shown kindness before. We expect attention from those who once gave us attention. We expect consistency from those who once appeared consistent. Gradually, these expectations begin to shape our emotional responses. When reality matches expectation, we feel comfortable, but when reality moves in a different direction, discomfort begins to grow. Many emotional wounds are not caused by intentional harm, but by the difference between expectation and reality. When we expect someone to always be available and they become busy, we feel unimportant. When we expect someone to understand our feelings without explanation and they fail to notice our emotional state, we feel unseen. When we expect someone to behave in the same way they behaved in the past and they respond differently, we feel confused. The pain is not always caused by the person's action, but by the expectation we silently created. Expectations can also create emotional pressure on relationships. When we unconsciously expect others to meet our emotional needs consistently, we may place them in a position they cannot always maintain. Every person carries responsibilities, challenges, and internal struggles that others may not fully see. Their ability to respond emotionally may change depending on their own life circumstances. When expectations are rigid, even small changes can feel significant. Buddhist wisdom encourages us to observe how expectations shape our reactions. When the mind insists that something must happen in a particular way, it becomes less flexible. This lack of flexibility creates tension. The mind resists change because it believes change threatens emotional stability. But emotional stability that depends entirely on external behavior is fragile. When we rely too heavily on predictable responses from others, we create a situation where our peace is constantly at risk. Invisible pain arises when expectations are not communicated or even fully recognized. Sometimes we expect appreciation without expressing our needs clearly. Sometimes we expect emotional closeness without understanding the other person's capacity. Sometimes we expect long-term consistency from people who are still exploring their own path in life. When expectations remain unspoken, misunderstandings easily occur. Reducing expectations does not mean lowering standards for how we should be treated. Instead, it means understanding that our emotional peace should not depend entirely on whether others behave exactly as we imagine. Expectations often create the illusion that our happiness is located outside ourselves. We begin to believe that if people behave correctly, we will feel stable, but stability that depends completely on external behavior is difficult to maintain. Acceptance creates a different experience. Acceptance does not mean approving of everything that happens, but it allows us to see reality more clearly. When we accept that people are influenced by their own experiences, limitations, and perspectives, we become less shocked when they behave differently than expected. We begin to understand that others are not always able to respond in the exact way we desire, not because they intend harm, but because they are human. Expectations often create emotional contracts that only exist in our own minds. We may believe that because we care deeply, the other person should care in the same way. We may believe that because we invest time and energy, the same investment will always be returned equally. But emotional experiences are not always symmetrical. Each person expresses care differently. Each person understands relationships differently. When we expect perfect balance in every interaction, disappointment becomes frequent. Letting go of rigid expectations allows emotional space to open. The mind becomes less tense because it is no longer trying to force reality into a fixed shape. We begin to appreciate what is present instead of constantly comparing it with what we imagined. Gratitude becomes easier when expectations are lighter. Emotional reactions become calmer when the mind is not constantly measuring whether reality matches an internal script. When expectations are reduced, communication often becomes clearer. Instead of assuming that others should automatically understand our needs, we become more willing to express ourselves calmly and directly. Instead of silently waiting for people to behave according to our assumptions, we become more open to understanding their perspective. This creates healthier interactions because both sides are not burdened by unspoken pressure. Temporary people cannot always fulfill permanent emotional expectations. Their role in our lives may be limited by time, circumstance, or personal growth. When we expect temporary connections to provide permanent emotional certainty, we create disappointment for ourselves. But when we recognize the temporary nature of certain relationships, we stop demanding more than what naturally exists. Expectations often create attachment to a specific outcome. We begin to believe that happiness requires certain conditions. But Buddhism teaches that true peace is not dependent on conditions always being perfect. Peace grows when the mind learns to remain balanced, even when conditions change. This balance does not remove care or kindness. It removes emotional rigidity. Letting go of expectations also reduces overthinking. When we expect specific responses, we often analyze small details repeatedly. We question why someone said something differently. We wonder why someone responded later than usual. We search for hidden meanings in simple situations. This mental activity creates unnecessary stress. When expectations are lighter, the mind becomes quieter because it is not constantly searching for confirmation of imagined standards. Acceptance allows relationships to exist without constant pressure. People feel more comfortable when they are not expected to meet unrealistic emotional demands. Interactions become more natural because they are not influenced by silent contracts. When expectations decrease, appreciation often increases because attention shifts from what is missing to what is present. Emotional freedom grows when expectations are balanced with awareness. We still maintain values and boundaries, but we do not create unnecessary suffering by demanding certainty from uncertain conditions. We understand that each person is navigating life with their own understanding, and their behavior may change as their circumstances change. Invisible pain becomes visible when we observe how often disappointment is connected to expectation. By gently releasing rigid expectations, we allow relationships to breathe naturally. We allow people to show who they truly are, rather than who we imagine they should be. This clarity helps us understand which connections are stable and which are temporary. When expectations become lighter, the mind becomes calmer. We stop demanding that every situation provide emotional reassurance. We stop expecting every person to behave perfectly. We stop believing that happiness depends on constant validation from others. Instead, we begin to develop inner steadiness that is not easily disturbed by external changes. Expect less, observe more, and understand deeply. When expectations no longer control emotional reactions, peace becomes more consistent. The mind becomes flexible, relationships become healthier, and temporary people no longer create permanent emotional pain. 5. Invest emotions where peace grows. Every human being has a limited amount of emotional energy. This energy is expressed through attention, care, concern, affection, worry, loyalty, and attachment. Wherever this emotional energy is invested, something begins to grow. Just as a seed grows when it receives water, emotional experiences also grow stronger when they receive attention. Buddhism teaches that understanding where to invest emotional energy is essential for building a peaceful and stable mind. Many people invest their emotions without awareness. They give attention to situations that constantly disturb their thoughts. They give importance to people who bring confusion into their lives. They continuously think about individuals who do not provide emotional stability. Over time, this repeated investment strengthens patterns of stress, worry, and disappointment. The mind becomes tired not because life is always difficult, but because emotional energy is repeatedly placed in environments that do not support peace. Emotional investment is powerful because it shapes inner experience. When you give attention to something repeatedly, the mind begins to revolve around it. If your emotional focus is placed on uncertainty, the mind becomes uncertain. If your emotional focus is placed on drama, the mind becomes restless. If your emotional focus is placed on constant validation from others, the mind becomes dependent. This is why Buddhism emphasizes awareness of mental habits. Where attention goes, emotional patterns follow. Temporary people often bring temporary emotional satisfaction. Their presence may feel comforting for a short time, but if the connection is unstable, the emotional foundation built upon it becomes unstable as well. When emotional energy is repeatedly invested in uncertain connections, the mind begins to feel insecure. Thoughts become repetitive, questioning whether the connection will remain or disappear. This constant uncertainty slowly reduces inner calm. Investing emotions wisely does not mean avoiding people completely. It means recognizing which connections support growth and which connections repeatedly disturb inner balance. Some people encourage clarity, kindness, and understanding. Conversations with such individuals often leave the mind feeling lighter and more peaceful. Other interactions may leave the mind feeling confused, drained, or unsettled. Wisdom involves observing how your emotional state changes after different experiences. Buddhism encourages turning emotional energy toward qualities that create stability. When emotional energy is invested in self-awareness, the mind begins to understand its own patterns. You become more aware of what creates peace and what creates disturbance. When emotional energy is invested in personal growth, confidence begins to develop. Instead of constantly seeking reassurance from others, you begin to develop trust in your own understanding. Silence is one place where emotional energy can grow peacefully. In silence, the mind has space to observe without distraction. Thoughts slow down, and awareness becomes clearer. Many people avoid silence because it feels unfamiliar, yet silence often allows emotional balance to strengthen. When emotional energy is invested in quiet reflection, the mind becomes less dependent on constant external stimulation. Mindfulness is another area where emotional investment creates peace. Mindfulness means being aware of the present moment without becoming overwhelmed by past regrets or future worries. When emotional energy is directed toward the present moment, unnecessary mental pressure decreases. You begin to notice that many worries exist only in imagination. By focusing on what is happening now, the mind gradually becomes calmer. Personal growth also provides a stable direction for emotional energy. When attention is given to learning, improving skills, understanding oneself, and developing inner discipline, emotional strength increases. Growth creates confidence because progress becomes visible. Instead of measuring emotional worth through other people's responses, self-understanding becomes a more reliable source of stability. Compassion toward oneself is an important emotional investment. Many people give kindness easily to others, but treat themselves with harsh judgment. They criticize their mistakes, regret past decisions, and carry guilt for long periods of time. Buddhism teaches that self-compassion creates emotional healing. When emotional energy is invested in understanding rather than self-criticism, the mind becomes gentler and more patient. Peace also grows when emotional energy is invested in acceptance. Acceptance does not mean passively agreeing with everything that happens, but it allows the mind to stop fighting against reality. Resistance often increases emotional pain, while acceptance allows understanding to develop. When you accept that certain people are temporary, emotional struggle decreases. When you accept that life changes naturally, the mind stops demanding unrealistic certainty. Investing emotions in healthy boundaries is another way peace develops. Boundaries protect emotional stability by limiting how much influence external situations have on inner balance. Without boundaries, emotional energy can become scattered across too many concerns. With clear boundaries, emotional attention remains focused on what truly matters. When emotional investment is balanced, relationships also become healthier. You care about others without expecting them to constantly fulfill emotional needs. You appreciate connections without losing independence. This balance allows relationships to exist without pressure. People feel respected rather than burdened, and communication becomes more natural. Many people discover that when emotional energy is redirected toward inner growth, the need for constant external validation decreases. The mind becomes more confident in its own stability. Instead of seeking reassurance repeatedly, emotional strength begins to develop internally. Temporary people no longer create the same level of emotional disturbance because happiness is no longer dependent on their behavior. Emotional investment in clarity helps reduce confusion. When you regularly reflect on what truly supports your peace, decision-making becomes easier. You begin to recognize patterns that previously created stress. You begin to notice which habits strengthen calmness and which habits weaken it. This awareness gradually transforms emotional experience. Gratitude is another area where emotional energy creates positive change. When attention is directed toward what is already present, feelings of lack decrease. Gratitude does not ignore difficulties, but it prevents the mind from becoming completely focused on what is missing. This balance creates emotional resilience because the mind is not constantly searching for something outside itself to feel complete. Buddhism reminds us that peace is not found by controlling everything around us. Peace grows when we understand how the mind relates to experiences. When emotional energy is placed wisely, inner stability becomes stronger. External situations may continue to change, but the internal response becomes more balanced. Temporary people may come and go, but the emotional foundation you build within yourself can remain steady. When emotional energy is invested in understanding, patience, and awareness, peace becomes less dependent on circumstances. You begin to notice that stability does not come from controlling who stays in your life, but from understanding how you relate to change. The more consciously emotional energy is invested, the more peaceful the mind becomes. Instead of feeling pulled in many directions, attention becomes centered. Instead of feeling emotionally exhausted, the mind begins to feel supported by its own stability. Emotional balance becomes a skill that develops gradually through awareness. Where you invest your emotions determines the quality of your inner life. If emotional energy is given repeatedly to unstable situations, the mind becomes unstable. If emotional energy is directed toward clarity, growth, and understanding, peace becomes stronger. Temporary people cannot always provide lasting emotional security, but inner awareness can. When emotional investment shifts from external uncertainty to internal stability, life feels lighter. You continue to interact with others, but your emotional balance no longer depends entirely on their presence. Peace grows when emotional energy is placed in environments that support understanding. Peace grows when attention is given to thoughts that encourage clarity. Peace grows when emotional dependence decreases and inner strength increases. Invest emotions where peace grows, and slowly the mind becomes a place of stability rather than struggle. When the mind becomes stable, temporary people no longer have the power to disturb your inner balance. Peace becomes something you carry within, rather than something you constantly search for outside. Not everyone who walks beside you is meant to walk with you forever. Some people arrive to teach you patience. Some people arrive to show you your worth. Some people arrive to help you grow stronger. And some people arrive only to remind you that your peace should never depend on something temporary. When you invest too many emotions in people who are only passing through your life, you slowly lose the stability of your own mind. You begin to search for reassurance outside, forgetting that true calmness can only be built within. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace is not found by holding tightly to everything that comes into our life. Peace is found when we understand what to hold gently and what to release with awareness. You do not have to stop caring. You do not have to stop loving, but you must learn to stop losing yourself. Your emotions are valuable. Your energy is limited. Your inner peace is precious. Not everyone deserves deep access to your heart, and not every connection is meant to become permanent. When you stop investing permanent emotions in temporary people, something beautiful begins to happen. Your mind becomes lighter, your thoughts become clearer, your heart becomes calmer. You begin to appreciate people without depending on them. You begin to connect without attaching. You begin to live without constant emotional pressure. And slowly, you discover a quiet strength within yourself. A strength that does not break when people change, when situations shift, or when life moves in unexpected directions. Protect your peace. Value your emotional energy. Invest your heart where understanding grows, where respect exists, and where calmness remains. Because at the end of everything, the most important relationship you will ever have is the relationship you build with your own mind. And when your mind is peaceful, even a temporary world cannot disturb you.